This episode is brought to you by The Manor, a premier addiction treatment facility in the hills of Wisconsin's Kettle Moraine Forest. Their program offers a tailored approach to those struggling with addiction in a secluded setting with no more than 11 men and women. With highly personalized treatment focused on trauma, Dr. Chantal Thomas and her expert team offer an authentic experience, creating the kind of deep emotional change that's crucial for long-term recovery. If you or someone you love are struggling with addiction, call The Manor at 414-930-1930. You can learn more about The Manor by clicking the link in the show notes or by visiting discoverthemanor.com.
Thank you for listening to The Path to Authenticity. My name's Tom Gentry. I think of this show as the opposite of small talk. You'll hear real conversations with real people who know who they are. We talk about what makes them who they are, how they became who they are, and how we might become truer expressions of who we are.
If this is your first time here, thanks for checking it out. If not, thanks for coming back. I'm Tom Gentry, and this is The Path to Authenticity. Episode 156 for December 28th, 2021. Last episode of the year. I hope you sign up for the January journaling challenge. I'm going to be sending out daily writing prompts, journaling prompts for those who join throughout the month of January. And I'm actually going to start probably before this episode hits. I'm going to send out a journaling prompt for us to take a look at the end of the year. Look back at 2021. Maybe what's ending and what's beginning. What do I definitely want to be different in 2022? So for this final episode of the year, I wanted to do something a little different. I started a manuscript back in November. And I suppose really technically I started it quite a bit before that, but I started putting the manuscript together, compiling the work that I've done around manhood over the last couple years. And I thought what I'd do is read some of what I've written. So I've chosen 4 little short sections that I'm going to share with you guys. But first, if you follow me on Instagram, you know I've been reading the work of Steven Pressfield, which has been really great for me. The book, The War of Art. And something he does every day when he sits down to write, before he writes, he invokes the Muse. He uses the invocation from Homer's Odyssey, the version translated by T.E. Lawrence. So I'm going to start by reading that. O divine poesy, goddess, daughter of Zeus, sustain me for this song of the various-minded man who, after he had plundered the innermost citadel of hallowed Troy, was made to stay grievously about the coasts of men, the sport of their customs, good and bad, while his heart, through all the seafaring, ached with an agony to redeem himself and bring his company safe home. Vain hope for them, the fools. Their own witlessness cast them aside, to destroy for meat the oxen of the most exalted sun. Wherefore the sun god blotted out the day of their return. Make this tale live for us, and all its many bearings, O Muse. Yeah, I love that. One of the things I've learned in life is that if we want it to be sacred, we have to make it sacred. And the way Steven Pressfield makes it sacred, his writing and his work sacred, is by invoking the Muse. Some people might pray, meditate, I don't know, but I just think it's really cool. So, like I said, I'm just going to jump in with a few things I wrote. In terms of the title, I have it. I have a theme and a concept, but I'm not going to share that title probably until publication. But I do intend to keep sharing bits and pieces of my work for this as time goes on. So here we go. A few years ago, I was having a conversation with a colleague. At the time, I was about 15 years into a career in substance abuse treatment, with a good working knowledge of the industry. My colleague, having cut his chops in another field, was new to mine. He had a fresh set of eyes. At the height of the opioid epidemic, it was a point when a wave of unscrupulous and often predatory new providers in the industry had just crested. We were discussing the local treatment landscape. Referring to a facility which I knew to be decent and reputable, I commented that it was quote-unquote a great place. Is it though? He asked. Is it a great place, or even a good place, or is it just not a bad place? We went on to talk about how low the bar had been set in our little world. Simply being ethical at the time often passed for excellence. Several years before that, I was in a committed relationship with a woman who I loved very much. We were functioning in a state of conflict, and I was trying to talk us through it to get to the other side of it. I don't recall the details, but in one conversation, she was characterizing me from a quote-unquote you men point of view. I've always taken exception to being regarded this way. Here is what I said to her. I'm a good guy. Before pointing out how often she heard me make that and similar statements, she said this. So what? I was stunned. So what? She said. You're a good guy. There are a lot of good guys. There's nothing special about that. As much as I hated hearing it, I knew she was right. There's nothing extraordinary about being a good guy. Her perspective was valuable. In any meaningful sense, that should be the bare minimum, not the ideal. We all need benchmarks. We have them and use them whether we know it or not. My vision for this book is to establish some benchmarks regarding manhood that will be difficult for any man to refute. By doing so, my hope is that I can help one male feel more connected to himself and feel more like a man, whomever he loves and whatever way he chooses to live his life. I'm going to move on to another one here. Don't mind the clicks. I'm recording on the same laptop that I'm using to read this. Suicide is something that has been formative in my life. The losses I experienced this way in my late adolescence and early adulthood have driven me to do this work. Without going into great detail about the specific situations, I can tell you there was a common thread. First, they were all guys ranging roughly in age from 17 to 25 years. All of them were going through things that seem monumental if you're a kid. One experienced heartbreak, one found himself in some trouble and experienced disappointment in himself as well as shame for his parents. Basically, he reached the zenith before age 10, so finding himself at the nadir of an adolescent descent, he couldn't handle it. One was living between divorced parents, one of whom moved away, taking him from the other parent and, more importantly, at the time, away from his friends. The oldest of them, I think, experienced some of all of these. He lost himself while navigating the transition from boyhood to manhood. They were all guys who were resilient enough to withstand the adversities with which they were met. The problem is they didn't have the tools. They needed to be able to talk to people they could trust, and they needed to talk about their feelings. They needed to be emotionally literate, and they needed people who were emotionally literate enough to validate their feelings. They were in pain. They needed to be able to articulate it and to be heard. This is a skill we do not typically cultivate in our culture. In order to talk about our emotions, we must first be able to identify them. When we live in a society that tells us we shouldn't be experiencing emotions in the first place, both of these are nearly impossible. How can we describe something we are groomed to ignore? Needless to say, this is a complex issue with many layers to be peeled away in order for anyone to have a functional relationship with their emotions. I have watched many men undergo the kind of necessary changes for this sort of transformation to occur. I myself have learned to have a different and better relationship with my emotions. I believe I had a key advantage in that I never really bought into the idea that women feel and men don't. I've always known that to be a ridiculous assertion. Further, having lived this experience, I can tell you with firsthand knowledge that it takes more strength and courage for a man or anyone to experience their emotions than it does to ignore them. All right. Now I'm going to read what I've written about toxic masculinity. In 2020, I interviewed the author and journalist Cleo Stiller. She wrote the book Modern Manhood, for which she interviewed many men on various aspects of the topic. In our conversation, she talked about how she intentionally avoided a couple terms, including toxic masculinity. She recognized from the outset that when most men hear those two words, they shut down. If she wanted men to talk to her, to open up to her, she understood she would be wise to refrain from using that expression altogether. The two terms masculinity and toxic masculinity are too often conflated. If you go on a social media platform and search the hashtag toxic masculinity, you'll find people at two ends of a spectrum. There are those on one end, predominantly women, who bash toxic masculinity without any clear expression about what is toxic about it. Then you have folks at the other end, mostly men, who bash the term toxic masculinity, as if it is a direct attack on masculinity itself. Considering where we are in our culture, in terms of gender differences and sexual preference, it's easy to see how and why this concept has become so controversial. The best description of true masculinity that I have found is by the author Jack Donovan. In his book, The Way of Men, he writes about the virtues that comprise ideal masculinity. These transcend culture and religion. They are strength, courage, mastery, and honor. Although none of these are exclusive to men, I'm not sure how anyone, male, female, or anything else, could argue that they are toxic. They are all good things. The key aspect of toxic masculinity, which is almost invariably missed, is the insecurity on the part of the man expressing it. A culture where there is no clear distinction between boyhood and manhood, where rites of passage into manhood are practically non-existent, is a recipe for producing men who question the veracity of their manhood. It makes for insecure men. And what do people do when they are both insecure and emotionally unaware? They attempt to somehow compensate for that sense of insecurity. Men try to convince themselves that they are, quote unquote, man enough, or that they are real men. The difference between masculinity and toxic masculinity is the difference between money and monopoly money. A better term to use is counterfeit masculinity. One is real and the other is fake. If I feel secure in who I am and in my masculinity, I have nothing to prove to anyone. But if I'm not sure how strong I am mentally, physically, or emotionally, if I haven't learned how to walk through fear by exercising courage, if I'm not sure I've mastered anything in life, nor am I clear on whether I am honorable, I'm going to act out in animated expressions of the mistaken cultural beliefs about manhood. I'm going to act tough. I'm going to be overly aggressive. I'm going to ridicule, overtly or not, anything that seems to me to be less than masculine. Multiply that by millions, and you have a society where lots of men treat women like shit because they are men who don't know who they are. They are pretending. They do not feel like men, so they pretend to feel like men. What exacerbates this issue is our prevailing belief that men shouldn't feel. It creates an atmosphere of repression. For a man who is taught to pretend he does not feel and who shames himself for doing so, it is nearly impossible to identify his insecurities. He is ignoring his internal experience. He is pretending not to have emotions. If there is one thing I've learned about emotions, it's that they always come out. If we don't process especially our painful emotions, they will come out in ugly ways. If I can't talk about my sadness or my anger at all, ever, there's a pretty good chance I'm going home at night and kicking my dog, beating my wife, emotionally abusing my kids, or all of the above. If I believe I'm not supposed to feel, I'm teaching my sons not to feel. The wilderness that modern men are taught to fear is the realm of emotion. In order to create a kinder, more peaceful world, we have to go into that wilderness and find our way to the other side. All right, I'm going to read one more thing here. I am the youngest in a family of 8 children. I have 5 older sisters. My brothers and my dad have never really been the type of men I wanted to emulate. All of them have substantial strengths and admirable qualities, but I grew up observing the ways they treated my sisters and my mom. There was the kind of sexism that demanded the men take out the trash after dinner while the women clear the table and wash the dishes. And if the trash can wasn't full, the boys retired to the living room where my dad already had his feet up. My father made the decisions whether he was the most qualified to do so or not. His was the last word, always. Looking back, I think I always had a sense of the unfairness of this. In my marriage and divorce, I learned how I wasn't showing up as a man. I was largely numb to my own wants and needs. That made me a passive husband. That passivity, a result of a fractured relationship with myself, made it impossible for me to be an adequate partner. I just went along with everything when it came to decisions that should theoretically be made in tandem with the spouse. If I had a voice, I wasn't using it. If I protested at all, I usually rolled over. I acquiesced and took on the role of Mr. Nice Guy, willing to always make peace with his controlling and overbearing wife. At least in that regard, I lived in a state of victimhood. But with the help of the last in a succession of couples therapists and counselors, I began to see what I was doing wrong. Or more specifically, I saw what I wasn't doing. And simply stated, I wasn't showing up, not in my marriage and not in my life. Before we began seeing this particular man, who was a pastoral counselor, I was aware of the book Iron John. Having even once met the author, I owned a copy inside of which he made a beautiful inscription. But this counselor, Matthew, brought Robert Bly's work on manhood to life for me. He helped me see that, in terms of how I was showing up as a man, if I was a penis, I was a flaccid one. It was the perfect metaphor for me as a husband. I flopped from one side to the other. I thought of myself as a great husband, but I had no sense of my masculine power. I failed to demonstrate the courage it would have taken to achieve true intimacy with my wife. Instead, I was a fake. I knew what I wanted, but often didn't bother to ask for it, let alone take it. When my marriage ended, I began to evaluate myself as a man in as many ways as I knew how. I began asking, what does it mean to be a man? And what should it mean to be a man? As I posed these questions to others, I began to see that no one could really give a clear answer. There were some common ideas. A real man is a good father and a provider. A real man is honest. A real man has courage. But ultimately, the answers were subjective. Everyone has their own ideas about what it means to be a man. If they respect their father, they essentially think men are supposed to be like him. If they hate their fathers, they think a real man is the opposite of him. Ultimately, I found no clear benchmark by which to measure myself as a man. No one can really tell you what it means to be a man. But if they think you aren't being one, if you aren't living up to their personal beliefs or expectations around what it means to be a man, those people are often more than happy to tell you. We hear expressions of disapproval that only serve to shame us. Be a man. A real man would blank. If you were a real man, you would blank. If you are a man who is not secure in his masculinity, statements like these are often fingers in your deepest wounds. And from where I sit, it looks like most men are not secure in their manhood. If they were, the term toxic masculinity would not exist. In cultures like ours, where there is no clear distinction between boyhood and manhood, men might question their legitimacy as men until middle age, as I did, or even longer. They may live their entire lives feeling insecure as men. It's a painful and confusing way to be. This is why initiation rituals and rites of passage are so useful. One day you're a boy, and you're treated as such. Then you go out into the woods and do whatever it is the initiation process requires of you. When you come back, you are a man. Your community sees you as a man. You have then let go of the selfishness inherent in boyhood and accepted the measure of responsibility for your family and community that manhood demands. So what do we do in a society where the line between boyhood and manhood is blurry? How do we answer these questions? What does it mean to be a man? After several years of pondering the question and talking through it, I realized this. The question is not, what does it mean to be a man? The real question is, what does it mean for me to be a man? I get to decide for myself. I should decide for myself. That very act of deciding for myself is one of great power. If I can answer the question for myself, I will feel grounded as a man. So that's what I did. I entertained that question and I owned the answer. Here's an example. I don't care what conventional wisdom tells us about men shedding tears. I've lived long enough and through enough to understand how much courage it takes for a man to let loose the tears he has bottled up for a lifetime. So for me, tears are just another bodily function. What it means for me to be a man is that I let the tears fall at the appropriate time and for the appropriate time. I'm not talking about sitting on a proverbial pity pot or crying anytime and all the time. I mean, I need to be emotionally aware, and I need to process my emotions rather than allowing them to process me. So that's it. That's what I got for now, and or what I have to share for now. So I'm going to keep chipping away at it. I feel really good about this. I'm excited, and I have passion about it. Every time I catch myself talking about this stuff, I get really excited, and people notice that I can go on and on about it. So I'm going to keep writing, and I'm going to keep sharing. And next week, I have a great interview coming up. Got 2 new podcasts coming out. One is one I produce with my friend Eric Bricker as the host. That's Good Counsel. As soon as that's up on iTunes, I'm going to be sharing that with you guys. Love for you to subscribe. Every little bit of support helps. And then I have the 20 Questions podcast coming up. So I'll have an episode of that out the first week of January. So I hope you enjoyed that. It felt really good to read it out loud. It's the first time I've really done that. I'm pumped. It's going to be a great year. And thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the show. I want to thank the band Punk Rock Opera, whose music you hear throughout the show. Their songs are used with permission from the artist and under a Creative Commons license. I want to thank Wendy Chin with Equivox. I want to thank the show's sponsors, the Manor and Windrose Recovery. Thank you guys for 2021. It's been a great year. It's been a fun year. And I can't wait to see where I am, where the show is by the end of next year. But I'm going to enjoy the process, and I hope you do too. Hope you had a wonderful Christmas and you enjoy your new year. So that's it for me. I'm out. Love you guys. Be nice.
That's our story. I hope you enjoyed the punk rock opera. We have one last piece of music for you. It goes like this.
Okay, go. funny bands. We cut our teeth with bloody hands. The rage has instilled in us. Can feed a crowd, give them a rush. Thank you. And good night.